Welcome back to America's Fractured Politics. 20 years after Citizens United darkened our doorsteps, the consequences have become impossible to deny. This coming election will likely break every record for dark money spending in American history. Each cycle, the flood grows greater, from super PACs with billionaire backers to anonymous social welfare organizations that won't tell you who they represent or what they're really buying. It's been a long time since anyone could plausibly argue that Citizens United strengthened democracy. It weakened it, disfigured it, and has now made money far louder than the voice of any voter. Competitive seats are disappearing every election, strangled by gerrymandering, partisan, racial, and ruthlessly efficient. Our maps are designed for incumbency, not representation. The few genuinely contested races left are overwhelmed by spending and messaging crafted for precision persuasion rather than genuine debate. Perhaps Trump's chaos will help disrupt some of that predictability. Still, the structure that allows billionaires and corporate lobbyists to dictate the terms of our democracy remains intact and more powerful than ever. Party-controlled PACs, special interest front groups, and advocacy nonprofits masquerade as legitimate civic actors while pumping out ads bankrolled by hidden fortunes. What the public sees looks like activism or grassroots energy, but it's really professional psychological targeting in the service of undisclosed sponsors. It's marketing disguised as citizenship. The Supreme Court built the foundation for this system. Dismantling it will take far more work than it did to construct it. By equating spending with speech, the court transformed money into a protected class of political expression. Now the wealthiest Americans, the writers of those enormous checks, enjoy the broadest constitutional shelter imaginable, while voters are left fighting new restrictions at every turn. The very notion of equality in political participation has been inverted. The right to give millions is sacred. The right to cast a ballot is negotiable. Piece by piece, the right to vote is being attacked. The Voting Rights Act's pre-clearance provisions, once a vital safeguard against discrimination, are all but gone. Section 2, meant to protect against racial targeting, has been gutted. And now we face the SAVE Act, a proposal that would further constrict access and finish the job. The system bends over backwards to empower donors while contorting itself to make participation harder for regular people. Still, there are faint glimmers of hope. Courts in some cases are striking down the most blatant racial gerrymanders, a reminder that not every piece of the machinery is beyond repair. But those victories are limited, isolated, and fragile. The result is a democracy running on autopilot. In many districts, the general election is a formality. Real contests happen in low-turnout primaries, where a few thousand motivated voters, swayed by floods of outside money, decide who will appear on the ballot in November. Super PAC money distorts everything it touches. For a handful of mega donors, it's now routine to parachute into a race and erase a candidate who threatens their interests. The marketplace of ideas, as it were, that we were promised has been consumed by the marketplace of wealth. There's no accountability in dark money politics. The average voter has no idea what most of the ads and social media messages they see actually stand for. Reporters and watchdog organizations work tirelessly to piece together donor networks and shell corporations, yet those groups remain purpose-built to evade scrutiny. The irony could not be sharper. An individual donor must disclose their name when they contribute $50, but multi-million-dollar entities can remain in the shadows forever. This rigged structure lands hardest on the communities already burdened with obstacles to participation. A black voter in a deeply gerrymandered district in the South may wait for hours to vote in a contest whose outcome was predetermined years earlier. A Latino voter in a sprawling suburb might discover that their neighborhood has been carved into several legislative districts, diluting their community's influence so thoroughly that no majority ever emerges. Young voters, energized by climate change, reproductive rights, or student debt, run headlong into a Senate where states with a fraction of the population of California and New York wield equal power. They're told they are the future. The present system refuses to let them shape it. The message from our political machinery is unmistakable. You can vote. Money doesn't broaden debate, it narrows it. Industries flooded with cash routinely block regulation that enjoys overwhelming public support. Tax codes are rewritten to favor capital over labor. Bipartisan consensus tends to form around donor priorities that the public bitterly opposes. The corruption is not partisan. It's universal. Democrats and Republicans alike depend on the same donor classes, the same corporate PACs, the same high-dollar fundraisers. Ideology shifts, but the structure remains. Every legislative cycle brings a new example of how far the system is tilted away from representation. The coming midterms will push it even further, testing whether democracy can survive under the weight of unrestrained money. Donald Trump, allergic to any constraint, continues to treat power as something to be monetized, while the Supreme Court has shown itself increasingly comfortable enabling that behavior. Even when conservative justices occasionally push back, as with the tariff decisions that signaled mild discomfort, the pattern is unmistakable. A presidency contemptuous of checks and balances, an indulgent judiciary, and a Congress dependent on the money Trumpism unleash, the damage accumulates across institutions, quietly, relentlessly, and from every direction. And yet it doesn't have to be permanent. There are real possibilities for repair. With the right majorities, the Democratic Congress could pass meaningful legislation to drag dark money into the light. Disclosure requirements could make it illegal to hide behind layers of nonprofit shells. Campaign finance laws could be written so clearly that even the Supreme Court would struggle to twist them into something else. Public financing systems like small donor matching could finally make competitive campaigns possible for candidates who aren't plugged into elite fundraising circles. States and localities could adopt independent redistricting commissions to eliminate partisan map drawing and ranked choice voting to break up the dominance of safe seats. None of these reforms would silence anyone. They would, for the first time in a generation, restore the balance between speech and citizenship, reinstating the principle that political power should derive from voters, not investors. The central challenge now falls to Democrats themselves. They can't simply gesture at reform. They have to mean it, and they have to say it plainly. Unless they commit to concrete campaign finance, disclosure, and voting reforms before 2028, they risk alienating the very voters who still believe they can deliver change. They need to introduce the legislation even if they know it won't pass this Congress, to show the public what they would do if given a real chance. The period between now and the next presidential election should be used to lay that foundation, to make the contrast unmistakable. If they fail, the disillusionment will be devastating. Voters who supported Democrats in the hope of protecting democracy will feel betrayed, and that cynicism will be difficult to reverse. The party has already used up its share of patience from the public. What remains is a test of whether it understands the urgency of the moment. They must go on offense, making campaign reform, disclosure transparency, public funding, and electoral fairness central to their message. Talk is no longer enough. Action, or at least accountability, is required. Progressive Democrats have the greatest role to play in forcing that shift. They can't defer to party elders or wait their turn for permission to lead. They need to press the issue loudly and without fear of offending the establishment. That means naming names, calling out the corporate Democrats whose allegiance to big donors has blocked reform again and again. Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and others like them embody the complacency that keeps the party bound to old alliances and corporate money. Progressives can't afford polite dissent. They need to make the leadership uncomfortable, to embarrass them, expose the contradictions between rhetoric and reality, and insist on new direction. Change will not come from quiet persuasion or committee negotiations. It will come from conflict, from the willingness of progressives to demand power rather than ask for it. They need to play hardball, to organize, confront, and sustain the pressure necessary to shift the party's center of gravity. Only through that tension can new leadership emerge, leadership that reflects the movement and not the donors who fund it. With perseverance, the progressive bloc can force openings in a structure long closed to reform. The moment they decide to stop accommodating and start challenging, the change becomes possible. And that's what it ultimately comes down to, the desire to change this poisonous system badly enough to fight for it. The current structure isn't inevitable. It was built deliberately through decades of court decisions, lobbying, and political cowardice. It can be dismantled the same way, strategically, persistently, and with public support behind it. The exposure of dark money, the restoration of voting rights, the reconstruction of fair maps and public financing, these are not radical dreams. They are necessary remedies for a democracy that has lost its balance. We are now living with the full consequences of what happens when money becomes speech and speech becomes policy. The people who built this order are betting that outrage will fade, that the public will accept a permanently rigged game as the natural state of politics. But history shows that every era of corruption eventually reaches its breaking point. The only question is whether the public recognizes that point when it arrives. It's here now in front of us. The 2026 elections are not just about candidates or party control. They are about whether democracy can still belong to the many rather than the wealthy few, whether votes can outweigh dollars, whether the act of participation, standing in line, checking a box, can still amount to power. We desperately need new leadership committed to reform, untethered from the donor class. That change won't come easily or politely, but it can come. The first step is to stop pretending that the system we have is normal or sustainable. The next step is to force those in power within both parties to face the truth that money has poisoned our democracy and that only decisive reform can save it. Progressives must make noise and must make the establishment sweat. If they succeed, the rest of us can back them with our own voices, our votes, and our refusal to look away. That's how the beginning of real change looks. Not glamorous, not instant, but possible. The Supreme Court may have turned money into speech, but we still possess something they cannot monetize, the will to resist. The battle now is to use it while democracy still has breath left. We can do it if we apply ourselves and if we do what we need to do in order to force change. This has been America's Fractured Politics. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. And thank you for your comments. Until next time.